Coming up on Tech News Weekly, war machines now fully autonomous and AI-driven. Also, the Galaxy Fold is official again, and the Light Phone 2 is featureless with a purpose. All that more coming up next on Tech News Weekly.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 98, recorded Thursday, September 5th, 2019. This episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by LastPass, a personal password manager and identity solution for businesses all in one. You only need one master password, and LastPass remembers the rest. Visit lastpass.com/twit to learn more. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tech News Weekly. This is the show where every week we talk to people who are making and breaking the tech news. I'm Jason Howell. I'm sad to say Micah Sargent is out today. He's not feeling well. I hope you feel better, bud. We'll see you on next week's episode. But as for this week's episode, we have a couple of really great interviews lined up. Starting with this, war and technology have long overlapped in interesting and deadly ways, of course. Now, in this time of heightened awareness around autonomous technologies, it makes more sense than ever that we would begin to hear about technologies designed for war and battle that are driven by autonomous systems and artificial intelligence. And wouldn't you know it, that time appears to be now. Joining me to talk about this is Zachary Fryer-Biggs, national security reporter at the Center for Public Integrity and author of Coming Soon to a Battlefield, Robots That Can Kill for the Atlantic. Welcome to the show, Zach.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. Such an interesting topic, and you dive into a lot of detail in your article. Let's kind of peel back a little bit to start off with. If robots are deciding who and what to destroy, aren't military commanders going to feel like their job is threatened?
That's been the major holdup that still is hanging out there. The technology's been progressing. Really, in the last 5 years is when we've seen this sudden hyper shift and focus on AI and the way that it could really improve weaponry. But the commanders still aren't comfortable with it fully. And that's why the technology, even if it gets fully to that last edge, that last capability where it can really do everything on its own, it may still get held up. The critical thing that's happening now is it's become an actual discussion and an actual decision commanders have to make, whereas before it wasn't even a possibility.
Right. Maybe it was a great idea or an interesting concept, but the technology wasn't quite there. And I feel like this past 5 years for just artificial intelligence alone, and obviously autonomous technologies as well, it's just escalated so quickly that suddenly this seems not like science fiction anymore. This seems like inevitability. What is this technology exactly? What's going on here? What is the state of the technology at this moment in time?
So I think the big shift that is triggering a lot of these opportunities for the military is in computer vision and in object recognition when it comes to being able to pull information from video feeds or photos. What the researchers are increasingly able to do is look at a feed coming out of a drone and identify a tank, identify a house, identify a plane sitting on a tarmac. And once you have machines able to make those sort of distinctions, now you can start to engage in, okay, does this mean the drone moves a little differently to keep its eyes on this potential target it's seeing? Do these boats shift slightly, which is one of the programs we talk about there, the CMOB? All of these sort of decisions, once you're able to really recognize the environment you're in. So that's the tech that I'd say has really shifted, is that sort of awareness of the environment around these systems.
And so much of the awareness obviously comes from artificial intelligence. We're seeing this in in consumer products, things like the Ring doorbell, or these cameras that are able to identify, oh, that's a person, that's this person, facial recognition, all this kind of stuff. So it makes sense that it would fold into here. What is this kind of escalating from or emerging from? Like, has this technology existed partially before in the military? What is it evolving from, would you say?
So one of the big shifts here is the defensive use of automation and, in some cases, really nascent versions of AI to offensive use. The defensive side's been around for decades, but that really was dependent upon typically radar. With radar, it's pretty easy to distinguish between an airplane and a bird or those types of things. And so there were automated defensive systems that have been put in place, thinking like the Phalanx anti-aircraft gun, the Aegis defense system, where there was automation built into these, but it was purely to defend typically ships from missiles or aircraft that might be approaching them. Now what we're seeing is, okay, if we can go beyond radar, if we can do things like using video feeds to understand potential targets, now we can look at offensive applications that are much more extensive than just sort of protecting against a saturation of attacks against a ship.
Yeah, and that really just elevates the kind of the severity of this technology. You can understand it as a defensive measure. Offensively, it takes it in a completely different direction. Obviously, the thing that people immediately jump to when they see this sort of thing, we were talking a little bit about this prior to the show starting, is Skynet. You know, everybody wants to like point at Skynet and say like, this is Skynet. Skynet is coming. But this is different from Skynet, from what you were telling me prior to the show. Explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so, I think everyone likes to think of Skynet. It's a common cultural touchstone.
Totally.
But if you really think through what that is a mind that encompasses the totality of all military hardware and is able to unilaterally completely upend society. Even if we're looking at AI helping, in one instance we write about a boat be able to maneuver to fire a machine gun so that Marines could land on a beach, that's a long ways away from including AI in all of your nuclear weapons such that you're nuking this and nuking that and, completely eradicating humanity. There's an enormous gap between using it in a specific sense on individual systems versus allowing it to control all of your systems. That said, the underlying technology is progressing, and I think that's what gets people scared. But you're absolutely right. We should make sure that we're not creating this alarmist notion that humanity is at risk at this moment. If humanity is going to be at risk, it's still a while off.
Yeah, it's not at risk, ... right now. Maybe eventually somewhere down the line. So one question that came to my mind when I was reading through your piece is the fact that like maybe, one side, let's say the enemy, decides that they want to implement this. Autonomous war machines, whatever you want to call them. But the other side, like from a human perspective, people from an ethical standpoint, a lot of people would say, no, keep humans involved because then we aren't just giving, robots or computers carte blanche to decide to, throw weapons on anyone that they decide. That keeps things a little bit more human and ethical. But if you're fighting against an enemy who has already implemented this, you almost have to, on the other side, then implement it also, right? Because then it's kind of an unfair balance, which makes me think that something like this is inevitable. Would you agree with that?
So I think when you look at the competition element of this, that's certainly what's been driving the military planners' interest in advocacy for implementing more AI into their weapon systems. There's definitely a belief that China is aggressively pursuing AI capabilities. They're less vocal about it. Russia is incredibly loud about how they're putting AI in everything and they're going to control the world with it. But the underlying that is this notion of competition that is really driving U.S. interest in AI for military hardware. What I'd say is that you've got that as one issue. Then you have the ethical issue about setting aside the capability or the competition. Should you allow machines to kill? I'll say as a small plug, this piece is part of a series, and the next one is on the ethics of AI and killing. So stay tuned. But the next part of that, sort of the final decision making of how do you weigh the ethics versus the military necessity, is what they're really struggling with. And to your point about inevitability, there are multiple military planning documents out there that describe from U.S. planners that they're sure that countries are going to unleash fully autonomous weapons that can make decisions on when and who to kill. They describe it as an inevitability. And so part of this discussion about the U.S. capacity is a question of keeping up.
Yeah, and I guess we should also touch a little bit on why removing humans from this whole battle playing field would be important or would be an advantage, and that's plain and simple. That's just because humans are slower than computers, right?
Right. On a simple basis, people are slow and ponderous, and that can be good if we're talking about ethics and killing people, but it can also be a problem if it's a question of reacting to input and trying to defend something or even to engage in an effective attack. So yeah, fundamentally, computers are faster, and that's not changing anytime soon. And so the constant need to get faster and faster is what's been driving this technology push. As I said, it's about 5 years old as far as the Pentagon's concerned, with a big concerted effort, and that traces back to the former number 2 Pentagon official who was looking at war games, looked around the world and said, the U.S. military advantage isn't so great anymore. Everyone else is getting faster. We're going to have to do something. And that's when the Pentagon started much more aggressively pursuing these technologies.
Right. Now, there's also the aspect of unintended consequences. Obviously, when you put, anyone in a wartime environment can make a decision that could, unintentionally harm the wrong party or the wrong person, wrong group. All that is possible. And yet, from a human standpoint, I feel like this is a conversation that's very similar to autonomous driving, right? And autonomous vehicles, fully autonomous vehicles, like where the ethical line is drawn as far as saying this robot or machine decided that it's okay to kill this person and not this person. It has to make that decision. Whereas we as human beings are used to making those decisions, and we kind of give ourselves a pass because that's just the way it is. Humans are fallible. Yet when we're programming it into machines, it's just a different, more complicated story, I guess. So, what would be considered good enough in this regard then, or is that even part of the discussion as far as a machine making a decision to kill someone and then realizing, oh, that was the wrong target, but that's okay?
Yes. So you're absolutely right. There are mistakes made all the time based on human decisions, and unfortunately, there are civilian casualties pretty regularly.
Yeah.
And so the idea of being able to transition to machines and somehow they're going to be devoid of any mistakes is unrealistic. And that's the Pentagon has accepted that. The initial inkling for this sort of push came from looking at what was going on with neural networks and image recognition from a competition called ImageNet. And in that case, the spark was that the computer algorithms started to have an error rate of identifying objects and images below 5%. And 5% was the human error rate. And so that was an example where the Pentagon planner said, okay, well, all of a sudden these algorithms are viewing things at a slightly better rate than humans. They're as good as humans. Let's proceed. Now, that's a really limited comparison because you're talking about algorithms dealing with basically a stock image set. You're not dealing with real world consequences. You're not dealing with changing conditions. So, what it means exactly to be as good as a human, we're pretty adaptable. We don't, in the research community, this is called brittleness, but we're pretty adaptable. We're able to accommodate different circumstances. Machines aren't as good at that. So it's hard to even say how you would judge in a true, give the machine the trigger situation, what human versus machine capacity looks like. But as some of the technical problems like the image recognition, like the ability to move around on uneven terrain get solved, that gap at the very least narrows.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Would you say you're optimistic about the potential of this technology? What do you kind of see the development of this over the next 5 years? Like, where do you see it headed?
So I'm a pessimistic New Yorker, so I'm optimistic about a few things. But I would say that there certainly are enormous opportunities created by the technology, whether it is limiting the manpower that's needed in dangerous situations. You got to think about some of the first military applications of robotics were in disarming bombs. And that was a situation where you used to have to send a person in to directly kind of fiddle with a bomb. And now you can send a robot in. So there are opportunities to use some of this tech to cut down on casualties. Does that also mean that there'll be more incentive to go to war because you don't have to worry about losing as many people? Possibly. So I look at it as the technology is remarkable and can do amazing things and will continue to do amazing things. I'm not sure we fully grasp what it means for us to lean on that technology yet.
Yeah, and that's kind of a theme of tech right now in a number of different ways. We're trying as best as we can to fully grasp what this all leads to 5, 10, 20 years down the line. But so much of it is so new, and we haven't really had to spend the time focused on these sorts of things. And some of the people that are focused, that are working with this technology are the companies, and are they spending the adequate amount of time thinking about the long-term ramifications of the technology that they're creating? I certainly hope that they are. Zachary Fryer-Biggs is the national security reporter for the Center for Public Integrity. You can find this piece at The Atlantic, and then you said you have a few follow-up pieces as part of the bigger package that are going to be hitting. When do you think the next piece is going to be found there?
You'd have to ask my editor, but we'll have it coming out soon enough.
Soon enough. All right, so check The Atlantic for his pieces. Thank you so much for hopping on today. I really appreciate you taking time.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll talk to you soon, Zach. Take care. Up next, you may remember a certain mega expensive phone from Samsung that's due out this year. I'm not talking about the Note 10 that I have right here. That's coming up. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by LastPass. LastPass is an award-winning security solution that helps millions of individuals and thousands of businesses navigate their online lives easily and securely. And oh, by the way, me too. I love LastPass. I use it all the time. LastPass recently set up an expanded business lineup with some amazing features that will improve security across your company and make life easier for your users, which is really what it's all about, because passwords are complicated. So making it easier means everybody practices safe password usage, and that's what LastPass is all about doing. LastPass Enterprise includes single sign-on for more than 1,200 SAML integrated apps, each with its own getting started guide, so it's simple to get up and running. LastPass MFA leverages your biometrics, things like your face and your fingerprint, and contextual factors, things like your location, your IP address, all those things to know you are who you say you are. LastPass Identity is a combination of LPE and LPMFA, from single sign-on and password management to adaptive authentication. LastPass gives granular control to IT and frictionless access to users, all in one simple, secure solution. Now, you know LastPass as the #1 most preferred password manager at home and at work, but did you know that LastPass can store more than just passwords? There's not just passwords in there. Important documents, things like passports, driver's licenses, can be stored in your vault as a digital copy. Use the passport option to upload a photo, and everything will be accessible in a few quick clicks right when you need it. It's just right there, hanging out, secured, in the same way that all your passwords are. Super useful. Online shopping cannot get any easier either. All your payment card information can be accessed for an easier checkout process, all without even opening your wallet. We use LastPass Enterprise here at Twit. We're excited about these new products. I mean, I use it every single day. Like when I think about the apps and services that I use on an ongoing every single day, literally every day I interact with LastPass, and they've just made it so easy to do so. It's not this chore to tap into my vault or log into a new website. Everything's embedded in the right place. I literally just click it and boom, I'm in, and I feel safe and comfortable doing that. From authentication to access to passwords, LastPass manages every entry point to your business so you can mitigate risk while improving employee productivity. Visit lastpass.com/twit, and you can find out how they can help you. That's lastpass.com/twit, and you'll see Leo there smiling at you as well. We thank LastPass for their support of this show. So you remember how 2019 was to be the year of the foldables? Well, things really didn't turn out the way Samsung expected. Huawei as well, by the way, but we're going to focus on Samsung. After releasing the Fold to select reviewers and press, they were pummeled by a collection of errors and issues with the hardware that definitely, I could safely say, could have been addressed with a proper QA process prior to that soft launch. So after a number of major hardware issues were identified by the press and in the press, and believe me, everybody read about that stuff, Samsung then retracted their plan to release the device to the public. They hunkered down in their secret underground lair to tweak the design and address those issues. And now, after 4 months of near silence on the issue, they had a few updates here and there as far as like, we're working on things, but now Samsung is back. They're launching the Fold in Korea tomorrow, September 6th. They put out a post. They said, yes, we're launching this tomorrow. The US, UK, France, Germany, Singapore, and other select areas to follow in the coming weeks, as far as Samsung said. Samsung actually showed off the redesign to The Verge at the IFA conference that's happening right now in Berlin. And so if you go to The Verge, you can see kind of pictures and video of some of the changes, but I'll talk about the changes a little bit here. The protective screen layer, which was the thing that people were peeling back because they thought it was a screen protector, because it really looked like one. You could see the seams on the screen. You saw where what appeared to be like the normal screen underneath, and then this like layer on top. And we're so used to like peeling those off, we don't want them there. Well, people did that, and it destroyed the screen. Well, that protective screen layer has now been extended to prevent peeling by consumers. They've extended it underneath parts of the frame so that they're hidden, which in my opinion should have been done in the very first place. It kind of like when you see the side by side of before and after the changes, like it looked really janky before. So thankfully they've upgraded that. They said they were going to address that, and now people will literally have to like take apart their phone in order to get to that layer and pull it off. That's the way it always should have been. Another issue was the hinge. They've upgraded, tightened the hinges, really made it sturdier than before, the Verge said. Less gaps to prevent debris from going in, which was another issue. Not entirely eliminated, so I guess it's still a possibility for some ingress to let some debris through. But something is better than nothing when you're spending almost $2,000 on a phone. They also put some plastic caps, and you can see it in that top photo right there, plastic caps at the hinge area to prevent more debris from going in there. And that's a really big improvement because from what I understand, like I didn't get a chance to play with a Fold in person, but in all the pictures and videos that I saw when it was folded up, there was just a really like a large gap there. Like I'm really surprised that they went with it considering how fragile the display was itself. So they put a plastic cap there that's going to cover up that gap, and I think that's going to go a long way. As far as everything else, internal specs are unchanged. Snapdragon 855, 12 gigs of RAM, 512 gigs of storage. So it's still top of the line premium smartphone. And the software apparently is more or less unchanged. They added a few small tweaks to the software, but for the most part, they left that the way it was. Other bits of news about this is if you happen to pre-order one of these devices way back when in a galaxy far, far away, you would have been high up on the list. And let's just say the Fold might be kind of like a limited release, low inventory device. Well, Samsung has, if you did that pre-order through Samsung, they just canceled all of these pre-orders, which is bumming a lot of people out because they're like, you know what, I've hung with you this long to get this phone. Does this put me at the back of the line? And it might actually put those people back in the back of the line. But Samsung's trying to make good on that. They're offering a $250 store credit for anything. And I have to imagine that that's going to be applicable to the Fold if you decide to then buy the Fold through the store. Maybe that's part of the reason why they're doing this. Regardless, I don't know that everybody is getting that credit. So if you did pre-order it, look for an email somewhere for that credit. And if you got your pre-order canceled and you didn't get that credit, I'd say call them up because that is whack. So there you go. If you've been waiting for the Fold, now you know that it's somewhere around the corner and you can finally get on this foldable train. Whether it's worth the wait remains to be seen. I'll be very curious to see what folks who have the early devices now will say, because you better believe like they're going to be getting in there and really trying to prove whether Samsung's time focused on fixing this device actually, resulted in a device that that can withstand everything, like real life, which is kind of what you expect out of an almost $2,000 phone. Also, somewhat related, but if you're interested in buying the new Samsung Galaxy Note 10 or the Note 10 Plus, you should definitely check out this week's episode of Hands on Tech, also all about Android. I have a full review of the 10 Plus there, and it has plenty of videos of me playing around with some of the AR effects, which were kind of cool little effects on the phone. I'll just summarize a bit and say that Samsung always knocks it out of the park on its hardware. The Note 10 Plus is no exception. It's a delightful device to hold, to use. If this is your daily driver, you're going to be happy to have it. It's powerful. All notes are powerful when they launch, so this is no exception. The S Pen, better than it's ever been. It's an active S Pen, and it does a lot of really cool kind of nifty features, air actions, that sort of stuff. Plus, the Note 10 Plus is just all around. It's a pretty awesome modern flagship, but it's crazy expensive, and maybe not as expensive as the Fold. So at least there's that. At least you can hang your hat on that. But it is expensive. It is pricey. And the camera system, I would say, was sufficient, not mind-blowing. Like, you got a lot of options and everything, but not all modes were amazing. This device, costs around $1,100 if you're getting the 10 Plus. So it has some ups. It has some downs. It's hard not to recommend it. Definitely check out the review, though, because I go in much further detail on all of those points. If the phone's worth it if you are a spec hound. This is kind of Samsung's biggest and best, I would say, as Notes usually are. I don't know. I think it's a pretty nice phone. It's got a nice little dazzling color palette to it as well. And honestly, what better way to contrast the premium quality of the Note 10 Plus by sitting it next to the phone in this next interview? In this day and age of so many people complaining of phone addiction, it seems like the time is right for a phone that's designed to make people use it less. The original Light phone actually released in 2017 with a goal of offering just that, a phone that satisfied the basic requirements of what we've come to expect out of a smartphone, and nothing else. Little else, let's say. Well, it's been a long road to the follow-up release. Michael Zelenko has been on that road the entire time and joins us now. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Hi, thanks so much.
It's great to have you here, and I just want to say I really appreciate you taking time. You're in Japan. It's 4 a.m. in the morning, so I appreciate you waking up to do the interview. Now, you shared your thoughts on the Light Phone 2 on The Verge yesterday. You've really been following this pretty closely. So I suppose let's start with your own interest in this story. How do you feel about your own tech usage? Do you think people have reason to be concerned with their usage? And is that why the Light phone is, timing is right?
Yeah, I think I personally find myself looking at my phone way more often than I'd like to. And I think tech addiction can be a strong word, but I do find myself drawn to the device in a way that detracts maybe from other parts of my life. I first kind of became interested in the Light phone because in 2018, when I was still at The Verge, I did a little minimalist phone review, and I ended up looking at the Light phone, and it was really kind of the most interesting devices of the bunch, just because it was so intentional and so different than any of the other minimalist phones out there.
Yeah. Now you've been, in conversations with Hollier and Tang, who created this phone. They ran, I think it was an Indiegogo the first time around, in order to kind of spark interest in this. What inspired them to create this? Was that born out of kind of their own frustrations with their own technology usage, or did they just see a trend and think like, hey, this is a wave that we should try and get on?
Yeah, I think it was actually a pretty genuine interest. Kai and Hollier met at 30 Weeks, which is a Google incubator based in New York. And Kai's background was actually working in phones. He worked on the Motorola Razr, and he actually worked on the Hinge team. So he kind of worked on old school phones, and he was very, very burned out just with the churn of the devices. And Hollier, meanwhile, didn't really have a background in phones at all. He was more of an artist. He made videos. He made music videos. And the two of them met at this incubator. And I think there's a real kind of genuine realization that instead of building an app, maybe they'd build some hardware. And that's kind of where that came from. That was in 2014. And for the next 3 years, they really kind of tinkered on this idea. How do you make an ultimate minimalist phone? Obviously, the first phone that they made, the Light Phone 1, was, if anything, too minimalist, right? All it did was make phone calls, which is, it's so limiting that even they stopped using it. And they got a lot of responses from people who really loved the idea and the concept. But, in 2019, 2018, you're not really going to be making phone calls to every contact you need to reach, mostly just because people on the other end probably won't pick up. So So ultimately, they're like, well, we need to actually create a device that does something that really works, and that's kind of where the Light Phone 2 came from.
And have we seen this idea before? Like, I feel like the last couple of years, we've kind of heard, how technology companies are integrating features into the phones, kind of the software, kind of what you're talking about. But the minimal hardware approach, I guess we have seen this before. It was feature phones back in the day, right? Like, is that an unfair comparison?
No, I think it's a totally fair comparison, and it's a comparison that they would make. The difference is, and they would say this, and they've said this every time I ask about, is that there's an intentionality here, right? A feature phone is limited just by its capabilities, whereas here you're intentionally limiting yourself to create a separate experience. There have been other minimalist phone efforts. I do think the Light effort is unique in that it's a premium effort. Take that for what you will. I mean, part of that is a price tag. Part of that is kind of executing on the concept front to back, right? So the design is intentional. The feature set is intentional. How often you're supposed to use the phone is intentional. So it's kind of this like luxury limited product.
Yeah, right. How I think this is one of the big challenges in designing a device like this is everybody has a different idea of what minimalism actually means, especially because we all use our phones differently. Some people truly, would get a smartphone and truly only use it for calling and text and maybe a little web browsing. Other people use it for literally everything. And so minimalism as a concept is going to be differently defined by everyone. So how, that must have been a big challenge in this device. Do you think they did a good job of finding the line and drawing that line of what people would want out of a truly minimal phone like this?
Yeah, I mean, the way they approached that challenge is they started with a survey, and they got a lot of the backers from the original Light phone to tell them what they would want in a more robust device. And you got a whole range of responses, right? Just from texting, which is kind of where I sat when I first saw the Light phone 1, all the way through WhatsApp. I don't think anybody asked for Instagram, but people were asking for a very broad feature set. Ultimately, what they landed on was just a few tools. The current phone, which is being released now, has texting, an alarm clock, which I think most people wouldn't even consider a tool. And there's one more I'm missing.
Texting, calls, alarm clock, and that's it?
I think that's it.
Yeah.
I think that's it. So, yeah, I think it's very, very limiting. As I've been following them for the last year and a half, they've talked about introducing more tools. And I know they've had a hope that they might potentially introduce directions, rideshare, and music at launch. They haven't done that. I think personally it would have been great to see that. I think it would have really wowed reviewers and customers because I think it would have really felt special, right? You don't really expect rideshare capabilities or even direction capabilities on an e-ink screen. Mm-hmm. And I think the fact that they've been working on that really, really actively, and if they had been able to execute that, would have been awesome to see. That said, they have said that they plan to roll those out before the end of the year.
So then the question that comes to mind for me then is, okay, that's awesome. They're adding these things that are really helpful. It seems like kind of a slippery slope then, because on one hand, it's a minimal phone. It's supposed to be stripped down and, to the core features that someone might want. Then we start getting into this world of, okay, but now we've added this thing and now we've added, and at some point, those features are broadened out to the point where it's like every other phone. and I mean, obviously, I imagine they don't let it get quite to that point. But is that part of the discussion? Like, how can we add these features without seeming like we're adding in features, and the features are what people are trying to get away from?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a conversation that they're having all the time. It's a conversation that I had with them a lot of time. I think they would say in 2019, there's a set of features that we need in order to go through life without relying on a separate device, right? And ultimately, that's kind of what they want to get to. They want to create a phone that could actively replace the phone that you have in your pocket. And the only way to really do that is to allow at least some base level of tools, right? So even when I was testing it, directions had become really, really important for my life. And there were moments where I could, quote unquote, go light, except for the fact that I needed to find my way across town. And I would have to bring my second phone in my pocket. And I think ultimately they want to find a way to get away from that. I think where they draw that line, and it's true, it's a negotiation. I think where they really draw that line is things that feel like feeds, things that feel algorithmically created, things that feel like networks rather than tools. But it is squishy, and I think they're very conscious of that.
Yeah, I think that that answers my question really well. It's kind of like services versus tools, which are actually different things, even though on our phones we're so used to those things combining in really crazy ways. Talk a little bit about the price here. So this is going to be about $350. That feels kind of high to me for a device that is all about minimalism. But I don't know. How did you feel as far as that price? You had some time with the device. Do the materials live up to that price tag? Like, what's the story behind the price?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's and I talked to them about that as well, in a very straightforward manner. As $350 is a lot to pay for almost anything, and especially when you're talking about a phone that does, at this point, much less than a flip phone. Yeah. And they're very conscious of that. And they're actually very candid about the fact that they're a small manufacturer. I think they talked to me about ultimately producing around 20,000 units. Everything is custom because it has to be, because it's very different than what exists on the market. And even with the original iPhone, which did really nothing, it's hard to really stress how little it did. It cost $150, right? And even at that cost, they weren't able to turn a profit. So with this one, this is the price they say that they have to be at. And we'll see. I mean, I talked to a lot of people, a lot of my friends I showed it to. They thought it was a very cool device, and they saw the price tag and they're like, well, I don't know if I'd actually pay $350 for an additional device that isn't totally perfect. That said, there's a lot of backers. They blew through their crowdfunding goal. And I could imagine, small pockets of communities being relatively interested in purchasing this.
Yeah. Now, you got some time with this, an extended amount of time. I don't know, probably a couple of weeks, I'm guessing from your article. Is this the kind of thing that really only makes sense once you've committed to spending that kind of time with it? Because I would imagine, people, and you actually write a little bit about this, you would show it to people who were actually really interested in the idea initially, and then they get it and they'd be like, okay, it didn't take long for their kind of interest to wane a little bit. But you also wrote that, you spent a good amount of time with it and you felt kind of liberated from, being locked down to your iPhone everywhere you go. So is it just the kind of thing that people just need to commit to in order to truly understand the value or the benefit of it? And if so, that makes me kind of nervous because people aren't likely to do that in large numbers. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of something I talk about in the piece a little bit, is that minimalist phone is really an aspirational purchase, right? You purchase it because you want to act differently. And in that, it's not unlike a gym membership or a book club or any other kind of activity or service that you buy into that, you hope to become somebody better. And the minimalist phone kind of operates in the very same way. Using the phone over the course of a couple of weeks, I kind of went through a few waves, right? The first wave is you see the phone and you're like, wow, it is cool. I mean, there's something very different about an e-ink display, and it's touchscreen, and it is very small, and it fits very snugly into your palm.
And then very quickly, the second wave is like, well, this thing really doesn't do anything, right? And I saw that a lot. Like people would pick up the phone, they'd poke it for like a couple minutes, and then just put it down because there isn't really anything to do on it. And ultimately, that is the point.
Yeah.
But after a week or so, there's kind of that third wave, and it does kind of offer you the opportunity to step away from your smartphone. And after a while, I found that to be really nice and a different interaction with my phone than I'm used to, while at the same time being able to reach out to a friend or even group text when I needed to. And I thought that was a nice change of pace. Whether people are going to dedicate themselves to seeing through every one of those kind of 3 steps, it really depends on that, right? The phone, and Joe Hollier, one of the founders, talks pretty openly about this. The phone isn't going to cure any kind of tech addiction, but it is a tool that if you are dedicated to having a different sort of experience, it could help.
Absolutely can. So this is really awesome. Michael Zelenko, you wrote this for The Verge. You're no longer with The Verge. Is that right? Where can people follow your work outside of this piece?
That's right. I'm actually the features director for Medium's OneZero, their new tech and science publication.
There we go. Well,
so you can find me on Twitter, or you can find me there.
But you started covering this for The Verge when you were working for The Verge a year and a half ago. So you kind of wrapped it up there. Is that what happened?
Right. Yeah, that's right. I've been following these guys since last April, I think. I first reached out to them. So it's been I've been playing the long game.
Right on. Cool. Well, Michael, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. This is a fascinating kind of look at a phone that feels very now. And some people might be asking themselves, do I want a phone that removes all of these things? I have a tech addiction problem. Like maybe this can solve my problems. I think people should definitely read your piece at The Verge. And then of course, OneZero. We've had a few people now from OneZero on the show. Love what you guys are doing there. So thank you for joining us today and waking up very early in the morning to do so, Michael. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks, Jason.
All right. We'll talk to you soon. That is it for this week. This week's episode. Hopefully Micah can join us next week. I'm sure he'll be feeling better a week from now. We'll check in next week, and he'll be sitting right next to me here at the table, so you'll see him then. Tech News Weekly records live every Thursday starting at 11 a.m. Pacific. twit.tv/live is where you can go if you want to watch it live. You can also email us, tnw@twit.tv, if you want to be part of the show. And really, the most important thing is to subscribe to this show. Subscribe to Tech News Weekly, and let us, you can do all the details that you need to know at twit.tv/TNW, and let us know that you subscribed. We love hearing from you. TNW@twit.tv. Follow us on the socials, and if you want to tweet at me, you can do so. I'm at Jason Howell on Twitter. Thanks to everyone who helps us do this show. Basically everybody here, but Burke, John, Jeff, Colleen, Miles, new name, helping out here today. Basically everyone, like I said. And thanks to you. We'll see y'all next week on Tech News Weekly. Bye, everybody.